Hey there. Welcome to week 42 of the Toolkit journey. Bum, bum, bum. And this week, we're talking about we're in the 5th week of the 7-week, I want to say, roundup of the 6th chakra. And I do want to say that I feel that this is quite possibly one of the most important cards in the deck. I know there's a lot of important cards, but for me, this is a huge turning point, a huge lesson we have to get. And I'm going to talk about it in a more broad sense than you might get in the actual reading. So first thing I want to say is that the card this week, if you will, the fable is called Rhonda Rhino, and it absolutely is my favorite piece of artwork in the deck. And it is, let me see, the title of the fable is Rhonda Rhino from Amethyst. And we know energetically that Amethyst is the stone of healing. And one of the interesting things about it is, as I dropped it on the floor, that's interesting, because I'm not going to go get it, but I'll get you in a bit, is that it is the card of forgiveness. So when we look at this, when we look at the card of forgiveness, the temptation, I think, in a lot of healing modalities is to say, well, I forgave them, or I forgive you for what you've done. Well, the issue is that if we judge someone, right? If we judge them, then therefore the forgiveness is forgiving them for having judged them. And I know that's odd, but the only person we can ever really forgive is ourselves. In other words, giving you an example, thinking that my mother inflicted all this pain on me, for example. Let's say someone says that. My mother inflicted all this pain. She was brutal. She was cruel. She was an awful person. Well, the thing is that in the nature of that, and I'm not invalidating it, I'm simply making the point about forgiveness. The minute I say she was cruel, she was mean, she was awful, she was a horrible person, she wasn't nice to me, I've made a judgment on her behavior. Now, I'm not saying that it wasn't that, but once I make the judgment, I energetically loop myself into it, right? That judgment makes me judge and jury. So all of a sudden, the energy of judgment holds me higher than that person, and it gives me, in a sense, the upper hand in the situation. Unfortunately, as the jailer judge of this, I have to hold that person in prison internally. So when I say, well, I forgive them, I'm saying, oh, I forgive them because I think they've hurt me. Now, that's not to say they didn't hurt you, but the stronger position, which is a very difficult position to understand, is I'm going to forgive myself for loving someone who was really cruel to me. And what that does, when we look at the energetic difference between loving someone who was so cruel and mean and obviously displayed behavior of not liking me, of taking their anger out on me. The minute I do that, I'm in that position of, oh, I'm the one in pain, and taking back my own feelings and putting myself in the driver's seat in a sense, because I'm saying, I forgive myself for not knowing that this person who I loved so much was so cruel to me, and that I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know what to do. And the truth is, no one really knows what to do when they're a child. No one knows what to do when they're growing up and they see this. There becomes just this response of like, I'm going to respond to the stimuli of the outside world. And what happens is we become responders rather than doers, rather than taking hold of our life. So when we jail people energetically, we are energetically becoming the responders, because we have to respond to that person in jail. So every time there's something we have to deal with, we're going, oh, but this person did that to me. So we don't know necessarily that a tree is going to mean we're in the forest. So I think what happens is a lot of times we take that idea of forgiveness and we, go into a meditative state and we find within us that energetic of love and we forgive them. Well, the thing is, you can forgive them from a higher space internally. You can energetically forgive them. You can walk around and say, I forgive them. But what happens is the veil that we carry of anger and resentment is still there. And it's almost as if when you say, well, I forgave them, what happens is you almost feel the energy of how much you hate that person coming out. You don't feel it, but other people do. So in other words, when I've had this happen for me, and I'll give you an example, a client will come to me and they'll say, my mother was horrific and I had this awful childhood. And listen, it happens and I get it. But then they say, I've forgiven my mother. I've moved on. We talk now and everything's fine. And it's kind of like, okay, cool. But see what I see sometimes, and I don't always know. So I'll say, I'm seeing or feeling that there's something incomplete. No, I'm really complete with it. You're reading something into it. Okay. And then as we get started, what begins to come out is the actual behavior the incident that caused that behavior is still alive. So let me give you an example. When I was little, my dad walked in the room one day, and I love my dad. My dad walked in, I was like, we were not the rich people. We were kind of lower middle class. And 3 girls in town, this was in our upstate home, were the richest girls in town, and their parents had, buku bucks. And we were playing Monopoly, and I was winning. I was like cleaning their clocks, and my dad walks in and said, oh, who's winning? And they said, oh, Tori's winning. And he said, oh, she must be cheating. Now, that was a funny moment. And I confronted my dad later. He said, I'm so sorry. Because he was like, oh, I was just kidding. And then later I said, it really bothered me. And he said, I'm really sorry. I was just kidding. And what happened was his apology wasn't enough. But I accepted it. Obviously, I didn't go, well, that's not enough. Because you see, the thing is that there could never be enough for the belief that was instilled in me. And so what the work took on was, because see, I was lucky. I was able to talk about it with my father, and I had that end means. But you see, what happens is a lot of times we say we forgive somebody, but the incident stays with us. So there's always this feeling that I had that no matter what, I was cheating in order to get ahead. How about that? Now, can you imagine going through life like that? And what was interesting was I did break all the rules, but I did them legally. For example, I got to know people in my industry and they hired me. I didn't go through the normal channels, which was great. But there was this part of me that said, well, I cheated because they met me. Well, how's that cheating? I wasn't born into that family. But you see, in my world, it was like cheating. So everything I did was mirroring my father's thoughts of me and belief in me. I loved my dad. So that was right there. And it wasn't until I sat down and I said to myself, I forgive myself for believing him because my insecurity about being good enough or better in that moment, winning the game was shameful. Winning was shameful. So what I'm trying to say is that idea of self-forgiveness, of, loving my dad so much that I didn't want to make him wrong. He had to be right, because that's the old idea of like, I forgive you for doing that. I know you didn't mean it. But the I know you didn't mean it leaves the undercurrent of what the I want to say the remnants of those actions. And so the real forgiveness has to be self-forgiveness. I forgive myself for carrying that for 30 years. There's a lot of self-forgiveness work. So let's get to, because this is very important. We're looking at the 5th chakra, and we're looking at the expression of our intuitive wisdom. So when we look at that, when we look at this as, I say it's the 5th chakra position, right? So it's the 5th card in the 6th chakra. What is that fifth card? Well, we know that the fifth card is, in fact, it's kind of the Mars position, but it's also about communication. It's the throat chakra. And so forgiveness is how we communicate. Are we forgiving ourselves for judging others? Are we forgiving ourselves for judging ourselves? You know, it's like I sat there and went, I must be doing this wrong. Can I forgive myself for assuming I was wrong just because someone said it? Because you see, that's what went through my life, is I did go through my life thinking I had to take someone else's pulse to see how I was feeling. So when we look at that, the only real thing that we can forgive, okay, the only real thing we can forgive is the idea that we're forgiving ourselves for having judged ourselves. And, you know, when we think we've done something wrong, that's often when we judge ourselves. And a lot of times the anger comes from, you know, it can anyway, of knowing I'm right about something and yet not winning. You know, when you don't win in those circumstances and saying, you know I'm right and I'm really angry and I forgive myself for thinking that it should show up a different way and punishing myself for that. So there's a lot of things that are going into this. So I really want to underline it. Rhonda Rhino of Amethyst really understates, if I don't take it in, I don't have to work it out. And so part of this work is that as adults, we clean up and we use tools that we didn't have when we were younger. And younger can be last week, by the way. It doesn't have to be, 30 years ago. You know, I'm constantly learning and growing, and I know you are, because if we don't evolve, personally, I can't work with people that aren't always evolving. I mean, I'm always listening going, yeah, that's right. Because we have to continue to grow. And by the way, I don't want to learn from someone who isn't growing. If they're spewing the same stuff all the time, I can't do it, because to me, it's like, I want to know that they're teachable. And that becomes important. So basically, and I got this all botched up, but the week's focus, here's the correct thing. We never forgive our others. We only forgive ourselves for having judged them. And then it says the message of the week. This week, we begin our journey into the meaning of forgiveness, and we come to understand that the only real forgiveness is of ourselves. So one of the things that you want to really get is that the energy, and I think I shared this, the energy of amethyst and the color itself is one of healing, and it often is a healing stone regarding addiction. Now, there may be, and by the way, there are great people out there who do a lot of work with crystals and stones and all that. And I really encourage you, if you vibe with a stone, to get it. Don't just get a stone because you're like, oh, it means this. Look at it, and if it's vibing with you, it's going to I want to say awaken. It's going to help you awaken in your meditations. So I have a few stones like that I really love. Okay, so the thing you want to get, and I'm going to share Tori's tips with you. Rhonda is from Amethyst, and just as Lucy is from indigo. Now that's an important distinction. I want you to notice there's a difference between a woman named Aubergine. She's not from there. She's named that. So it's a label. Lucy is from indigo, which was the prior card. And Rhonda is from amethyst, which means they are emerging from this information. So really get the energetic of some of the languaging. I think that's going to be very important. Amethyst signifies healing from addiction, derivation, one's source. It's important in spiritual discussion, as in all the fables that represent the intuitive third eye. There's an inherent sense of fairness and love in this story. I really want to underline that this week is really about the fact that you yourself are finding that inherent sense of fairness, you know. And I think that when I say inherent sense of it, that doesn't mean righteousness. It doesn't mean that you will get it right. It doesn't mean that it's going to turn out the way you want it to. But what it does mean is that your own personal sense of what's right and wrong is alive. In other words, yeah, it was wrong that my dad did that. And it really, I can still pull up the anger from it because it was stupid and wrong. And if I was an adult, I'd have a few more choice words at the time. But the shame that was integrated into me, that really was an unfair thing to put on me. And had he been aware, as the adult, had he been aware, he probably would have said, you know what, I'm really kidding. She never does that. And it's totally me that cheats. See, because he was putting his own fears on me, and I took it because I love my dad and I didn't want him to suffer. So sometimes we take on pain from a family member because we think if we take it, they don't have to feel it. And that's kind of it. We become, as children, so to speak, the sacrificial lamb, and we stay in that role. So it's very important that you get that the inherent sense of fairness is like, you know, that's not a fair role. That's not a role I want to play. And it's not a role I'm going to play. So really taking that on as a shift is a huge win. Huge, huge, huge. So I just do want to underline that. Now, I'm not going to read the fable, as you know, but remember the fable of Rhonda Rhino from Amethyst. It tells you where she comes from. And based on where she comes from, it's also telling you how she interprets her world. See, when you look at something and you say, this person's from there, it's going to give you a clue as to how they're going to interpret their world. So someone who comes from a family of alcoholism is going to interpret their world perhaps through the lens of those issues. And so you're going to get to see how they do it. That doesn't mean, that's why forgiveness is so important. Just because they have that lens doesn't mean that I have the problem. Very important. All right, so let's take a look, because I'm always pulling off my glasses. Let's take a look at the first impressions. Now, when we look at the fable, and you'll see this in the fable, Rhonda has a pure heart. She reminds us that what we don't take in, we don't have to work out. She offers us the idea that our choices can be based purely on love. No matter what happens to her, she never loses sight of her dream. Deprived of a loving home, her vision is to create one. Often our family patterns are revealed by what we desire most. I want to underline this, deprived of a loving home, her vision is to create one. You know, I think it's really cool, that particular line in many ways, because what happens for most people is if they are deprived of a loving home, they actually go out, they seek a partner who is just like the abuser from their home so that they can heal it in order to find a loving home. With Rhonda and with self-forgiveness, we imply that we don't need to heal another person. We just need to go get the loving home. And that's a key to this awareness. And the idea is, well, that's easier said than done. However, once you notice it, it's kind of like knowing that there's a pothole on your street on the road. Once you know it's there, it's a pretty good chance you're either going to go around it or over it. You're going to learn how to maneuver it. And that's the idea here, is you're going to learn to maneuver what could possibly be a repetitive pattern of going into that same pothole. So if you have that, this is a very important week to start looking at, you know, am I sending out to the universe the idea that I need people in my life to forgive? And if I need people to forgive, I need to forgive people. You know, like forgive my parents, I'm going to keep attracting people that need forgiving. What does that mean? Abusers. So if I'm only forgiving myself, and if I say I forgive myself, and I'm going to look at that person at face value and say, I don't feel comfortable, and I forgive myself for drawing that person in, and I'm going to move on. And the more chakra and energetic ownership we have, we recognize that fifth chakra issues is what we're sending to the world. So this brings out the point of, are you sending out that message of forgiving yourself and therefore being able to find a whole person who can forgive themselves? Or are you sending out the message that I have forgiven my parents, and you're going to find people who need to forgive their parents so you can forgive them? But have they worked through their stuff? And can they work through it with you? And some can, but it's not as common as you'd think. Okay, so it's not as rare as you think either. So there you go. What I love about this week is that the meditation is probably one of the stronger parts of this particular week. So I would encourage you, if you can, every morning for this week, and I want to know know if you do it. Please post below if you can do it. And if you don't do it every day, just kind of like post, I did it 3 days or what have you. I really encourage you to do the meditation this week, because it really is about finding that innocent part of you and finding that part of you that can forgive the wounded parts, you know, that say like, you know, I forgive myself for lashing out at people when I didn't know any better. And, you know, many times, by the way, if you're in this heightened awareness, you've probably already apologized to those people 20 times over, you know, and they may or may not forgive you. But that's not about you, that's about them. See, as we're saying it, people who can't forgive you are not forgiving themselves for having trusted you. And that's what they need to forgive. So therefore, if it's like, if I know that, you know, I hurt someone, making the amends becomes very important. And again, that is what that, you know, this thing is about, really, is about recognizing that we forgive ourselves, others forgive themselves, and then we can come together and say, listen, I was, you know, and I'll give you an amends that I made, right? Which was, I went to an old business partner who I was still in business with at the time. And I said, you know, I want you to know that I really recognize how unfair I've been and how harsh I am with you. And I just want to acknowledge you for doing a really good job and apologize for behaving that way and say to you that I don't want to be that way anymore. And I'm going to do my best to correct that behavior. And I did. But what was great was her response. She said, I get that. I get that. And I'm glad you shared that because it was bothering me. And that's it. That's it. And we had no more mishigas about that. So the point I'm making is that really owning and recognizing how I forgave myself for not knowing how to behave with a business partner. I didn't know. That doesn't make it okay. See? So I still had to do the due diligence there, but it's important that you get that that's what this is really about. Now, I really encourage you also this week to do this work. This is a really pivotal week. And if you get this material, your life is going to soar. I'm not kidding. If you get this week. And that's why Rhonda Rhino from Amethyst becomes an extremely powerful card when it comes up, because it is about the difference between mature and immature. It's the difference between stepping up and taking charge of your own life and sitting back and thinking that someone else has to come and fix it or change it or be better so you're better. Okay, so in the solo exercise, it says, is your habit of judging other people blocking you from achieving your dreams? And then it talks about what are you, excuse me, what are you judging? And I really encourage you, again, this is on the Thursday Make a Connection, page 180 to 181 in the book. It's a really tough one, but I also want to say to you, if you get a chance to do the group exercise with another person, I encourage you to do it. It's probably one of the most healing exercises you can do. I actually love this one, and I've seen people when I've had classes do wonderful breakthroughs. And by the way, if you are a practitioner, if you do lead groups or you teach people, this is a great exercise to do, and this is a fantastic thing to really get people to see where they are in their progression. Please, I would really encourage you, and I hope you do, I hope you post below some of the things I've asked you to post. Like, definitely, if you're a practitioner, how does this exercise help you and support you, not just for yourself, but for others? And also, I'd encourage you to post any evolutionary thoughts or any progress you've made by studying this particular fable and doing the meditation this week. And I will see you next week, and I hope you all are raring to go, because when you get this platform, that the key to real manifesting and magnetizing things in your life is self-forgiveness. Boom, it's game on. See you next time.